On a frozen night in 1961, three young men walked into a desert reactor, and a country erased what happened to them. 4 milliseconds. That's all it took for one of them to become pinned to the ceiling. America has had exactly one fatal reactor accident on its own soil, and most Americans have never heard its name. The reactor was called SL-1, Stationary Low Power Reactor Number 1. 40 miles west of Idaho Falls, black lava plain. Nothing for horizons in every direction. It wasn't a power plant, it was a prototype built by the Army to heat radar stations near the Arctic Circle. Small, simple, portable. That was the promise. And for 2.5 years, it worked. Then came the night shift on January 3rd. The reactor had been shut down for 11 days over the holidays. 3 men were scheduled to bring it back online. Army Specialist John Burns, age 22. Navy Seabee Richard Legg, age 26. Army Specialist Richard McKinley, age 27.
2 of them were married. One of those marriages was already over. Burns arrived at the reactor having slept on friends' couches for 2 nights. His wife, Arlene, had been asking for a divorce for weeks. That afternoon, they fought on the phone. She hung up. At 7 p.m, she called back and ended the marriage for good. 2 hours later, Burns was standing on top of a reactor with his hands on a control rod. The procedure was simple. Lift the central rod 4 inches, reconnect it to the drive mechanism. He lifted it 26. At 23 inches, the reactor went prompt critical, a runaway state no operator is supposed to live through. In 4 milliseconds, core power climbed from 0 to 20 gigawatts, 6,000 times its safe limit. The fuel didn't just melt, some of it vaporized. Inside the core, water flashed to steam and slammed upward at 160 feet per second. A column of superheated water hit the reactor lid at 10,000 pounds per square inch. The entire 9-ton reactor vessel jumped 9 feet into the air. When it came back down, 2 of the men were already dead. The third would last about an hour.
A shield plug, a heavy steel stopper used to seal unused rod channels, shot out of the top of the reactor like a bullet. Richard Legg was standing directly above it. The plug entered through his lower body and exited his shoulder, pinning him to the ceiling above the reactor. Burns was thrown into a concrete wall, killed instantly. McKinley, knocked unconscious, bleeding, dying, was left lying on the operating floor, alone. At the nearby fire station, the alarm didn't mean much at first. There had been 2 false alarms earlier that day. The firefighters drove out across the snow-packed road. Everything looked normal. The building was quiet. Then they climbed the stairs, and their Geiger counters slammed off the scale. They retreated immediately. Health physicists arrived next in full respirators and protective gear. When they finally entered, they found McKinley still breathing, contaminated to 500 roentgens per hour, a lethal dose in any direction. They loaded him into an ambulance anyway. He was pronounced dead before the ambulance reached the highway. The vehicle was too radioactive to return. They drove it out into the open desert and abandoned it there. Burns' body came out the next night, after extensive decontamination, by 6 volunteers working in pairs. Legg was harder. He was still pinned to the ceiling. It took 4 days of planning to retrieve him. 10 men, 2 at a time, 65 seconds each inside the reactor room, no more. They used sharp hooks on long poles to pull his body free of the ceiling, onto a stretcher lowered from a crane. All 3 men were buried in lead-lined caskets. Their funerals were kept brief to protect the mourners.
Legg's grave was lined with 3 feet of poured concrete. McKinley's casket sits in Arlington, the only lead-lined casket in the cemetery. Then came the question nobody could answer. Why had Burns pulled the rod so far?
Investigators reconstructed the accident from fragments, scratch marks on the rod, activated metal in the men's belongings. A cigarette lighter screw from McKinley's pocket had turned into radioactive copper. The buckle of Burns' watch band, the gold wedding ring on Legg's finger, all transmuted by neutron flux. The forensics were definitive. The motive was not. Theory 1. The rod stuck and Burns yanked too hard. The official conclusion. But this rod had no history of sticking. Theory 2. He was exhausted, distracted, heartbroken, and made a catastrophic mistake. Theory 3. Legg, known for startling co-workers with physical pranks, grabbed him from behind at the wrong moment. And Theory 4. The one that refused to die.
Rumours spread through the site that Legg had been sleeping with Burns' wife, that the divorce call that night was the breaking point, that Burns had pulled the rod deliberately to kill Legg, himself, and the reactor all at once. There is no evidence for this. There is also no one left alive to disprove it. The autopsy report was classified until the 1990s. When it was finally released, it didn't resolve the question. The entire reactor building was buried in the desert. The Army's nuclear program ended within months. Every commercial reactor built after SL1 was redesigned so a single control rod could never, under any condition, start a chain reaction on its own. 3 men died, and the rule they rewrote now protects every reactor operator alive. On a frozen night in Idaho, in 4 milliseconds, they became the reason nuclear power learned to be careful.